Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Darlington Raceway, the track too tough to tame. The Lady in Black. One of the most classic racetracks that we go to in the sport. It goes back to our early days. It's basically one of the ground roots of NASCAR aside from the beaches of Daytona and the paperclip at Martinsville. This track provides a lot of things. Darlington stripes, scruffs of the wall, entertaining finishes. It holds the best finish in NASCAR history from 2003. And this weekend we celebrated the history of our sport with a lot of throwback schemes, celebrating the 75 greatest drivers of NASCAR. And one driver who let the win get away from him a year ago makes up for it this year. Let's get into all that went down on Throwback Weekend at Darlington. Number 1, William Byron, number 24 car, back in victory lane for the third time this season as he captured yesterday's Goodyear 400 in that very, very luscious number 24 paint scheme, throwing it back to Jeff Gordon's 50-year anniversary of NASCAR paint scheme he ran in 1998, winning yesterday's Goodyear 400 over Kevin Harvick, Chase Elliott, Brad Keselowski, and Bubba Wallace. What a year William Byron is having right now. I mean, he started out the season a little bit slow, and then he got 2 back-to-back wins at Las Vegas and Phoenix, and then he kind of hit a little bit of a slump, and then recently he's gained momentum back with some really good results. Like last weekend, he spun or had a miscommunication early in the race, and then had speeding penalty, grazed off the wall, fell laps down, was able to make them all back and get a third place out of it. This weekend, he ran consistently well the entire race. He was in the top 10 for the majority of the race. Wasn't a real contender, but he still had good track position to maintain himself with the leaders. Then he started creeping up to the top 3 by the end of stage number 2, and in the final stage, it looked like he was going to be battling for the win with guys like Kyle Larson, Ross Chastain, and Christopher Bell. But when we had to cycle green flag pit stops late in this final stage, Byron's team was a little bit slow, and they fell all the way back to 7th, and it looked like that's where they're going to finish. Until with 18 laps to go, Ryan Newman, making his return to NASCAR, spun around, bringing out the caution and setting up a pretty entertaining final 15 laps of the race, where we had a couple of incidents. We had a big wreck in turns 1 and 2. We had the top 2 tangle, and we'll get into that in a second. But William Byron came on top after that next to last restart and was able to become the control car for the final restart. And the good thing about where he was at, he was a relatively clean race car versus the guys behind him. Some of those guys were caught up in some wreck, that big wreck late in the race. He got himself a great restart and catapulted himself to the lead off of turn number 2, holding off Kevin Harvick for the final 2 laps, and was finally able to make up for the one that got away last year. If you don't know what I'm talking about, but most of you probably do, I'm talking about last year where he was in position to win the race in the flamed number 24 paint scheme that he was throwing it back to Jeff Gordon's 2007 year. But Joey Logano retaliated for an incident on the last restart of the race where Byron got loose off of 2 and pushed Logano up to the track and into the wall just a little bit. Logano ran it back down, coming to the white flag, and in turn 3, he bumped Byron into the wall and pretty much dumped him and took Byron out of contention for the victory. And instead of Byron winning that race last year, he settled for a 12th place finish with a red car and not very happy with how Joey Logano raced him at the very end. This year, though, he's able to make up for it with a clean final 2 laps and punch his 3rd win of the season. A lot of people were wondering, after he got 2 victories last year, could Byron get his first season where he had more than 2 wins? Well, he's accomplished that. And right now, he is the winningest driver that we have at Hendrick Motorsports so far this season as far as who's winning. And yesterday, he also was able to get the number 24 car at Hendrick Motorsports, its 100th win. A lot of people are forgetting how many times Jeff Gordon won in the number 24 car. He won 93 races. And ever since then, William Byron has won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 races. That now totals to 100 wins for the famed number 24 car. And right now, would Byron be considered the favorite at Hendrick Motorsports the way he's winning well and winning races? I'd say so. I mean, I will say his teammates have also been competitive, and if 2 of them, you can make a case that they are as equally good as Byron. But right now we have the winningest driver so far this season in William Byron. What he's accomplished, he's able to make a good day into a great day, or able to take a bad day into a good day. That's what this 2014 does. They just, they overcome adversity, and they're able to make up for it at the very end of the race. And late in the race, they were there at the right place at the right time when chaos happened in front of him on the next last restart. But a big win for William Byron and the number 24 team. And I could say right now, even though we don't have a definitive favorite, Byron probably right now should be the favorite right now regarding who can make it to the championship for and how they're performing so far this season. A big win for William Byron and the 24 team yesterday. Number 2, Chastain and Larson tangle again. these two just cannot seem to let go of one another. It's like they're coupled together like magnets, for crying out loud. Yesterday, Ross Chastain driving a throwback scheme to Dale Jarrett's 2001 UPS car, and Kyle Larson throwing it back to a scheme that Tony Stewart ran in the Xfinity Series in 2009 for Rick Hendrick and actually won the race. They were battling it out for the win in the final stages of the race. Chastain won stage 2 after battling with Martin Truex Jr., and they had an incident at the end of that stage that sent Truex around, and Chastain won the stage, even though it was just good hard racing for that extra bonus point. In the final stage, it turned into Ross Chastain having control of the race. But not far behind him was that number 5 car, who was just lurking and lurking and lurking after he had a bad pit stop early in the race. He was able to recover from that and get it back to the top 10. Shows you how good Kyle Larson is, but also how good he is at this racetrack. He looked like he was going to be battling it out with Ross Chastain for the victory at the very end of the race. But on the final two of the final 3 restarts, those two had their incidents yet again, as when they went down into turn number 1, there was side-by-side. Larson pushed Chastain up towards the wall a little bit, and at the moment the caution came out when a wreck happened behind him, Chastain actually was ahead of the 5 car, and he wasn't really happy with how Larson raced him right there. So on the restart right after that, the 5 and the 1 go side by side into 1. The 1 car apparently may have drifted up the track a little bit thinking he was clear, but he wasn't, or Larson got into him. Regardless, they both make contact, and both of them were taken out of contention for the race win. 2 guys going at it, I feel, in my opinion, but it's just unfortunate because how many times have these guys run into each other this year, and how many times do we have to include Ross Chastain in a highlight that doesn't really mean a win? It's talking about getting involved into an incident with somebody else. It's the same old song and dance, for crying out loud. But Larson ended up with a 20th place finish. Chastain finished with the right to race car in 29th. The big question, obviously, now, are these guys ever going to stop getting into each other when they're racing for either a win or for position on the racetrack? I mean, it's hard to let them both go as talented as they are. Rick Hendrick was not really pleased with Ross Chastain, saying, we're not going to tolerate how he raced against my guys. He said, if that happens again, one of them's going to be putting the bumper to him in a bad way. So he wasn't really pleased with what happened in the end. I feel like, though, that was a racing deal where they're both fighting for the same piece of real estate, and with about 10 laps to go in the race, it's all or nothing for the driver. It's like, it's no more give, it's all take, and that's what I felt like it was. But you could say whatever you think about what happened in that incident, but it was just 2 guys going for the same piece of real estate, and unfortunately both of them ended up not being in contention for the win at the very end of that race. They were contenders for the final few laps of the race, but not when the checker flag flew, which was very unfortunate for both of them. So once again, Larson and Chastain tangle with one another. Number 3, Martin Truex Jr., the dominant race car of the day, looked like he was going to get another win at that track too tough to tame until catastrophe faltered him late in the race. Early on the race, Martin Truex Jr., who started on the pole, dominant race car, so strong, led almost every single lap of that first stage and captured stage 1. Stage 2, he seemed to be pulling away again, but as the stage went down to a close, Ross Chastain was just getting closer and closer and closer, and then he took the lead from Truex towards the end of stage number 2. Truex tried it on the last lap when Chastain was stuck behind lap traffic, including his teammate Daniel Suarez, who's trying to stay in the lead lap. So Truex tries to make a move to the inside, and he gets into Chastain a little bit, and they both make contact, and Truex goes spinning around, and that ultimately kind of hurt his car a little bit with the damage that he sustained. He still stayed in the top 10, but he wasn't the same car like he was in stage 1 and at all in stage 2. In the final stage, he hovered around 7th to 10th place for the most part. Then they gained some positions on the final pit stop of the race, and they restarted 3rd, and it looked like they were going to have a chance for the win. But apparently the car pushed up the track going to turn 1 and got into the 22 of Joey Logano and sent them in around and collecting a few other cars in that wreck. Some of them were actually able to continue. Truex, unfortunately, was not so lucky, and he ended up with a 31st place finish. It sucks because the last couple of weeks, the 19 team has gotten their act together. They've been running so competitively. Of course, he got the win at Dover. He ran really well last weekend at Kansas. It looked like he was going to get a second win of the season yesterday, but unfortunately, if it wasn't for the contact with Chastain at the end of stage 2, which wasn't Chastain's fault, it was just a racing deal for that extra bonus point, we could have been talking about Martin Truex Jr. in victory lane again, winning the second ever Goodyear 400, and it would have been his 3rd win of the track, if I'm not mistaken. But what are you going to do? They still have shown speed. They've shown speed, and they've gotten better and better. It's only a matter of time before they get win number 2 of the season, but yesterday they're going to look back on thinking what could have been if we didn't have that stage 2 incident at the very end. Number 4, champions coming home with solid results. Second, third, fourth place finishers, Kevin Harvick, Chase Elliott, Brad Keselowski. Great results for all those guys. Starting off with Kevin Harvick, his final throwback weekend, throwing it back to a scheme he was supposed to run in 2001, which would have been the number 30 AOL car. Now, obviously, the scheme was painted differently, but same type of design that the AOL car had with the Sunny D-Light paint scheme. Of course, things changed when we lost Dale Earnhardt in the 500, and Harvick jumped into what was then the 3 that became the 29 at Rockingham. Kevin Harvick ran the scheme that he was supposed to run, and a design that he was supposed to run in 2001, and remained consistent yesterday. I mean, he was within the top 12 for a majority of the race, never fell as below as 13th, except for the final cycle green flag stops. He was unfortunately part of that big wreck with 13 laps to go on that restart, but he didn't sustain a whole lot of damage, and he was able to stay out because they looked at the car and they said, I think you're good to continue, just keep pressing on. And he was on the inside lane on that final restart of William Byron. If he got a little bit of a better launch into turn number 1 side by side with Byron and maybe cleared him, Kevin Harvick could have pulled through. But I think the damage that they sustained in that wreck cost them a chance. I mean, it kind of hurt them for the most part with their aerodynamics. But nonetheless, for his final throwback week at a second place finish after a couple of weeks where they weren't really themselves, unlike where they were earlier in the year, Kevin Harvick did a great job yesterday, and a second place finish is a good way to get momentum back on their side. Then Chase Elliott, a third place finish, running that, oh my goodness, perhaps the scheme of the weekend. That red number 9 scheme with the font the same that Bill Elliott drove when he drove for Evernham Motorsports from 2001 to 2003. Oh, that scheme is just, it's beautiful. Just look at it. It was a really good paint scheme to see on the track yesterday. They weren't really a race-winning contending car for the most part. They hovered around 10th to 12th for the majority of the day after starting 21st. But like most drivers, they benefited from some of the incidents that happened late in the race. Now, they too were part of the wreck with 13 to go. And looking at the car, it felt like they were going to have to bring it into pit road. But spotter Eddie Hunt said, I think you're good. Stay out. And that was perhaps the best call. Because if they come in, I don't think they would have gotten a top 10 finish at all with that damage. They stayed out there with the gamble after the scuffs. The left rear quarter panel a little banged up, but they still held their own on those restarts. And I felt like that left rear was going to probably cause a little bit of an issue because it acted like a parachute in a way, but it didn't really slow them down too much. They were able to come away with a nice third place result, the best finish for Chase since his return from the broken leg. It's only a matter of time, folks, before that 9 gets to victory lane. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But his worst finish since his return, 12th place. If he keeps this up for the rest of the regular season, even if he doesn't win, he could still point his way in if we don't get more than 16 winners. He could still point his way in. I still think he's going to need to win a race, and I think he's capable of doing it. But with all that they dealt with yesterday, with hovering around the 10th to 12th place position for the majority of the day, and then being a part of that wreck, even though they sustained minimal damage to come away with a third, got to be pretty happy with that. And then Brad Keselowski running a Castrol GTX paint scheme. That looks so nice. Something you would see on a NHRA drag racing car that John Force would pilot. I don't think it was a throwback to John Force, but it's kind of similar to what he ran in the past. He was the best running forward all day yesterday. Hovered from 4th to 7th place. I mean, RFK has just gotten their act together this year. They're just running so competitively with Brad. His teammate Buescher, they've kind of struggled a little bit. They were able to get a 10th place for the 17 car, but Brad never left the top 10 yesterday. He was in there the entire day yesterday. Now, they too were part of that wreck with 13 to go, and the right rear had more damage than what the left rear of the 9 car had, and almost like a parachute, but still held his ground those final restarts and was able to come away with a 4th place finish. They're inching closer to possibly winning a race. It's not out of the question, and that's how talented Brad Keselowski is, and that's how much this team has improved this season from where they were a year ago. A year ago, I would have said you're crazy if they would have made the playoffs. This year, they can make the playoffs with how competitive they've been. Now, can his teammate, if he gets competitive and starts running up front and consistent basis like Brad? Sure. But Brad, the way he's running right now, I can't tell you how impressed I am with what he and this team have done from where they were last year to where they are right now. Great job by all 3 of those champions yesterday and some members of the 75 greatest drivers that we've had in our sport. At number 5, the whole Darlington experience. What a weekend for NASCAR. This weekend, we not only got to celebrate throwback weekend of the history of our sport with incredible paint schemes, from throwing it back to some of the old schemes that Kevin Harvick ran, some schemes to the early 2000s, late 90s, 80s, like old Quaker State paint schemes, a couple Dale Jarrett throwbacks, some of them throwing back to Jeff Gordon, some of them throwing it back to Bill Elliott, some to Dale Earnhardt, some to Dale Earnhardt Jr., some to Jimmy Johnson, Matt Kenseth. These throwback schemes this weekend, there were some good schemes. They weren't like, some were like, oh my goodness, I love those paint schemes. Some were but for the most part, seeing all these different paint schemes this weekend was just a great weekend for our sport to recognize the history. And of course, we celebrate the 75 greatest drivers in NASCAR, as they all were announced this past week. And we honored all of them at the race this weekend. Some that are still in the sport, like still racing today, like an Elliott, Kyle Busch, Larson, Harvick, Hamlin, Keselowski, Martin Truex Jr., Joey Logano, and Ryan Newman, who participated, has returned to NASCAR for the first time since 2021, I believe. Yeah, 2021. They all got recognized on stage with some of the legends of the sport, some of the drivers of the original 50, like Jeff Gordon, Richard Petty, Jeffrey Bodine was part of it, Bill Elliott, obviously, Bobby Allison. Just a good group of drivers, and of course the newest drivers that we introduced, not just current drivers, but drivers that have raced in the past like 5, 10, 20 years, guys like Jimmy Johnson, Matt Kenseth, Carl Edwards, Casey Kane, Greg Biffle, Sterling Marlin, a lot of those guys. Tony Stewart and Mark Martin didn't attend. I think they had other things on their agenda, but it was just a good time to honor those drivers pre-race. It just brought back so much nostalgia. And the whole race broadcast on Fox was very entertaining. In the first stage, we had two Pettys. Richard and Kyle Petty broadcast the first stage with Mike and Clint, telling stories of the past, contributing to the race for the most part. Of course, Kyle Petty, he works for NBC, and they got him on loan for this one race before he gets ready to go to action in the middle of next month when NBC makes their return. But it was good to hear him and his father just telling stories and contributing to the race and what they saw yesterday. The first time ever, actually, that both of them have been in the booth, and it was just a great experience to see and listen to them and what they had to say about drivers racing at Darlington. Then stage 2, one of the drivers that I talked about where we got recognized, joined us in his return for the first time since God knows when, Carl Edwards, Mr. Backflip, Concrete Carl, joined us for stage 2, and I'm like, where in the world have you been? You've disappeared from the sport, except one brief appearance at Texas in the fall of 2019. Like, where have you been? He kind of still downplayed why he retired and everything. It's a question mark about why he retired, but he brought a great analysis to the race yesterday with Mike and Clint. Even though Carl has never driven those cars, even though some rumors out there that maybe he might consider a return, which I don't know, and I don't really think so. But it feels good to hear Carl Edwards, even though I wasn't the biggest Carl Edwards fan, but I respected what he did on the racetrack as a race car driver. Of course, his success in the sport was great. Won an Xfinity Championship in 2007, and he won some big races in the Cup Series. I mean, he won at Darlington in the Southern 500 in 2015 after he was a lap or two down early in that race after making contact with the wall. I mean, this guy just knew how to get around racetracks that were driver racetracks. This was a driver's track, and it benefited Carl Edwards' racing style. He could have won the Southern 500 a second time in 2011, but he got beat by Regan Smith on those old tires that he gambled at staying out on. But it was good to hear Cousin Carl yesterday. Great to hear his analysis and everything. And the final stage, $1 million Bill, awesome Bill from Dawsonville, Bill Elliott, like last year, joined us for the final stage. And year 2, I listened to him yesterday. This guy, even though he's never driven these Cup cars, he saw exactly what Mike and Clint were seeing yesterday and brought great analysis. Like, he even mentioned a sandbox reference regarding Larson and Chastain when they had that incident. I laughed at that, but it was good to hear Awesome Bill. He just, he's all around the sport, again, with Chase driving in the car. I mean, Awesome Bill, how can you not love Bill Elliott? One of the most successful drivers of our sport. It was just good to hear him. The broadcast in general yesterday was good. The racing, it was also good. It wasn't great like it was a year ago, but it was solid. The first stage, obviously, when it was the first couple laps into a run, it was tough to pass. But as the tires begin to wear out, passing becomes more of a factor, and you see a lot of guys battling it out side by side, depending on who's managing their tires better than the other guy, whether it's in front of them or behind them. It was just some good, entertaining racing. And, of course, the final laps of the race yesterday were intense, especially with those wrecks late in the going. But it was still a good weekend for NASCAR to celebrate our sports history with these throwback schemes honoring the greatest drivers of NASCAR, having some of them come up and call the race on Fox yesterday and seeing a good race yesterday. Just round of applause to Darlington. It's a good, fun racetrack. Whether you like it or not, if your driver does well or doesn't do well, it's a fun place to go to, and it's something I gotta get to one day. I gotta get to a Darlington race because this track just brings the best, mostly the best, other than the worst, in a NASCAR event. So now the throwback weekend is officially done. I want to quickly acknowledge all the mothers out there, even though it's a day late. Happy belated Mother's Day to everybody out there, including my mom. I love you so much, Mom. I just, mothers, we can't thank you for what you've done for us, raising us to be the perfect, well-behaved, and kind and caring kids/adults. We love you from the bottom of our hearts. My mom, again, I love you so much, Mom. You're the best. Now that throwback weekend's officially done, we're throwing it back to an old friend next weekend. Next weekend, NASCAR makes its return, I cannot believe I'm saying this, to North Wilkesboro for the All-Star race. We're taking a break from racing for points. Next week, we're racing for money at a track that I never thought we would return to since we left after 1996. NASCAR has been trying in some form of ways to try to save the track, even though a lot of people are like, I don't think we're ever going back to North Wilkesboro. We might as well forget about it. But Marcus Smith kept trying and trying and trying, and he was able to accomplish his goal by getting some short track slot cars, or not slot cars, late models on the racetrack a couple of years ago, and provide a good show, and it was a good turnout for the crowd. And this weekend we are returning to North Wilkesboro for the 2023 NASCAR All-Star race. I mean, I've seen a couple of races on YouTube, but I feel like it's going to be a little bit different, maybe a little nostalgia, but a little bit different racing with these cars when we go there this weekend. We're racing for $1 million. We'll have a couple of entertaining events. We've got a pit crew competition this weekend, which we haven't done in a long, long time, and I'm looking forward to that. We've got the trucks on Saturday, and then, of course, Sunday we've got the All-Star Open. Of course, 3 drivers will advance, 2 drivers on winning those 2 stages, and the fan vote winner joining the 21 other competitors in the main event of 200 laps. So the big question is, who's going to be victorious in NASCAR's return to one of NASCAR's old racetracks that we return to? Will it be a Kyle Larson? Will it be a Ross Chastain going for everything? A Chase Elliott? A Kevin Harvick? A Kyle Busch? We shall see, and I cannot wait for that race. It's going to be so much fun to return to an old friend. So we'll see what happens, but I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I hope you all had a good time with your moms yesterday, and I hope you all got a good time watching that race yesterday on Throwback Weekend. So subscribe, like, congrats once again to William Byron and the 24 team on their impressive win at Darlington yesterday. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Let's go racing!